Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation podcast, where we discuss the exciting innovations that lie ahead for organizational ground transportation. Each episode, we cover topics tailored to those resolving transportation-related challenges and provide tips, tools, and trends that will inspire you to stay ahead of the curve. And now, here's your host, Daniel Perez.
Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation. Today we have a special guest, Hugh, he is dedicated to supporting national fleet on the EV programs across Massachusetts. Hugh Reece, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. So great to be here. I'm really excited to be on your show tonight.
Thank you, Hugh. So we met previously at one of the MASTOR National Limousine Association events, and I was very intrigued with your background. So let's for all the listeners, we're going to talk a little bit about National Grid and the support and all these innovative programs and grants and very educational information for operators in entering into the EV space, and to also discuss any concerns and challenges and how National Grid is just going into these initiatives. So just sit tight and enjoy the episode. So back with you, tell me about your background and how you got into National Grid.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer that question. So I think for me, I've always been really excited about companies that are both benefiting the environment and people. And so after college, I was really trying to find kind of organizations and industries that really checked those boxes and aligned with my values. So it became clear that the energy space really had that huge impact, but specifically within the energy space, the clean tech industry. So I got my feet wet in the clean tech space by first working at a residential energy efficiency and solar company, and then I transitioned to a company that sold energy management software on a global scale. And then I segued and transitioned into the EV space by first working at an EV charging company. And then I landed here at National Grid as a program manager implementing our fleet electrification program. So really excited I landed at National Grid.
Thank you for sharing you. So for all the listeners, what is your current responsibilities at National Grid at a high level, so that way they could get a little bit of context about your role and responsibilities?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think to step back, we as utilities offer programs to help customers in a variety of different ways. And then I'll take kind of 3 steps back to give you the big picture. So Massachusetts has some of the leading clean energy and climate policy in the country. So as a state, we're looking to be net zero by 2050. And then the state looks to utilities like National Grid, and then in Massachusetts, there are 2 other utilities, Eversource and Unitil, looks to the utilities to help achieve its goals. So we as utilities are in charge of creating programs to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So you may have heard in Massachusetts, we have energy efficiency programs. One is called Mass Save, but more recently, we started launching EV programs. In Massachusetts, transportation is actually the leading contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So by creating programs that help people adopt, one, purchasing EVs, but also the respective charging infrastructure, it's a great way to help kind of start chipping away at those greenhouse gas emissions that the state's looking to do. So kind of that's like the big wide view, but getting more narrow. Within National Grid on our team, we have 1, a strategy team that's actually creating the EV programs, and then 2, an implementation team, folks who are actually making sure these programs are running smoothly and efficiently. So I specifically implement our fleet programs, which are targeted to helping fleet customers adopt and push forward on their electrification journey.
Awesome. And appreciate you sharing those inputs. When it comes to fleet programs, let's dive deeper. Is there a specific requirements for when in your category under fleet programs?
So we try and keep these programs available to kind of all groups, but you'll see like our programs may have different varying levels of incentives depending on the fleet type. And so I'll quickly talk high level on the programs themselves. So we have 3 programs, I would call it 4-ish programs, that will help customers throughout their electrification journey. And so our first program is called Fleet Advisory Services. And when you're talking about eligibility, this is only eligible for public fleets. So think municipalities, governmental organizations, et cetera, like school districts. And so if you're a private fleet, unfortunately, you can't leverage this program. But yeah, the essence of this program is providing comprehensive fleet level analysis so that you can make and be informed about, one, what your electrification path should be. So we're looking at your fleet vehicles and then coming up with recommendations on what EVs would make sense should you start purchasing and procure those EVs themselves. But then from a Make Ready standpoint, our Make Ready program, the goal behind this program is to offset your infrastructure costs. So it can be very expensive to install the EV chargers, but also the subsequent infrastructure that's required to connect to the chargers themselves. And so our rebates are structured in a way where public entities will get slightly higher rebates than private entities. So that's kind of high level on who's eligible, but the different varying amounts depending on the type of customer that you are, if that makes sense.
Got it. Thank you, Hugh. And when it comes to, you mentioned more like public entities. What was the name of that program again?
Fleet Advisory Services. Yeah.
Fleet Advisory Services. What are the actual programs for private private operators?
Yeah. So I guess the good news about being a fleet in Massachusetts is, one, you have your utility programs, but there are also a ton of state programs. So I know for private fleets, unfortunately, you can't leverage Fleet Advisory Services. However, the Mass Clean Energy Center has a program that's very similar to our advisory services that private fleets can leverage. But yeah, so the other programs private fleets can leverage through National Grid are our Make Ready program. So what I was describing earlier, so offsetting the infrastructure costs. But we also have programs to help offset your utility bills. So one program, it hasn't launched yet, but we're targeting like late summer, is an off-peak rebate program. So we'll incentivize fleets, those who charge during off-peak hours, so between 9 p.m. and 1 p.m., will issue a credit on your bill. So this is just another way to help offset your bill, because we know once your chargers are online and up and running, you may have lower gas costs because you're switching to EVs, but your electricity costs are definitely going to go up. And then we have another program that will help offset your utility bill called our Demand Charge Alternative Program. So just take one step back. Utility bills are complex, so I'm going to try and just describe this as simply as possible. But your utility bill is broken up into a couple different buckets. And if you look at it, you'll see supply, and then you'll see delivery. And within delivery is your demand charge. Think of demand, and the analogy that one of my colleagues has provided me, I think, is a good one, of if you're filling up a swimming pool with a garden hose versus filling up a swimming pool with a fire hose, the demand charge is how quickly that pool's going to get filled. So the bigger the pipe, in our world, the higher demand, the bigger the bill you're going to get. So our demand charge alternative program really helps kind of smooth those demand charges down. So it has a few parameters that can indicate like how much you'll save, but on average, we tell customers that they could see savings upwards of 20+% on their bill should they participate in the demand charge alternative program. So it's another program that both public and private entities can leverage for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. So if it's okay with you, if we could break down each program. So the Make
Yeah.
Ready program, if you want to talk a little bit about the make ready. Who qualifies? Who doesn't qualify? What are the pros and cons, and so forth?
Yeah, sure. So make ready, like the easiest way to describe it is like what the way I describe it is what is required to make a site ready for charging. And so when you're kind of like looking at all the buckets of costs that you may incur as a customer, you have the utility side infrastructure. So we have like the transformer. From the customer side, you have the conduit or the pipes, you have the trenching, the wiring, kind of everything going from the meter leading up to the charger itself, also including like the bollards, the permitting process, the design work, all that, those types of costs are eligible for the Make Ready program. And then the one kind of distinction between public and private fleets, if you're a public fleet, you'll also be able to receive rebates on the chargers themselves. And then the rebate amounts are dictated or capped based on the output of the chargers themselves. So we kind of like two buckets of rebates. One is for level 2 charging. So level 2 chargers charge at a slightly slower rate than a level 3 or DC fast charger. And they also are less expensive. So our caps for level 2 chargers are lower than our caps for level 3 or DC fast chargers. So think higher the output charger, the more incentives you'll be eligible for.
Got it. And then from an infrastructure perspective, whether it's public or private, I'm assuming that the provider will pay for the infrastructure and then they will receive an incentive. Like walk us through that process.
Yeah, no, that's a good question on how you get the rebate in themselves. So the way it's designed is you apply to the program, like we review all your costs, then we'll supply a commitment letter saying like based on the costs you've shared with us and based on the chargers that you're leveraging, we're estimating your rebate to be this amount. And then you go through the process, you get everything installed. We have what's called like a closeout process where we're looking for you to provide validation of what was actually installed. So it's pictures, it's charger session data, and then it's the actual costs of the project. So we're just seeing, are there any major deltas in scope? Like, was the project way more expensive or was it less? And then we will either like keep the rebate the same or like move it up or move it down based on if the project costs went up or down. But yeah, after we review all the closeout paperwork, and you kind of check all the boxes, we would then mail a check to you if you were participating in the program.
Got it, Hugh. And who qualifies for the Make Ready programs? So again, if I'm an entity, does it matter if I have 10 vehicles versus 500 vehicles or 100 vehicles, and each infrastructure is different, right? So how do you guys do about those infrastructure mechanisms?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So you could be a fleet of one vehicle, you could be a fleet of 1,000. So I think that's what's nice about this program, because we didn't want to like kind of exclude anyone in particular. We do have charger requirements, and so that's one thing where you just want to double check our website, and if you're interested in applying, is making sure you pick the right type of charger. Like we don't want folks to go down the path of selecting equipment that actually would make them ineligible. But yeah, in terms of like fleet makeup, we're kind of agnostic. It's just you need at least one fleet vehicle, and then from there you could have as many fleet vehicles as you want. You can participate.
Got it. Thank you, huge. And the charging requirements at a high level, is it based on the level 2, level 3, or DC fast chargers? How does that work?
Yeah, so the eligible chargers, we're just looking like that mainly the chargers have been validated and vetted by third-party certification. So you may have heard of like the term like UL listings. So that's a big one. It's just we want people to be installing hardware that's safe in the chargers that have been qualified under these agencies validates that point. So yeah, that's the big one, is like the UL listings, and then there are a couple other qualifications that people need to be aware of. But I think the great thing is it's a pretty extensive list. So it's like, does the list capture every charger on the market? No, but it has a majority of the big players that are out there. So I'd say, like, if you pick a charger that you don't that originally you were like hoping for, I would say look at the list, because I'm sure you'll find something that would be equal or same.
Got it. And you, at a high level again, because I'm sure there's a lot of specific data and requirements. But if I am a private bus company or trucking company, what sort of charges am I eligible to, and what is actually appropriate to conduct business based on how fast this charge could charge the fleet, right? Because we have different routes based on our schedules, let's just say.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think at the end of the day, it's all about sizing the infrastructure to your needs. So, and there are a couple of reasons why to do that. One, like, if you are having routes, like low mileage routes, you don't need to install in really high output DC fast chargers. Like, yes, that'll charge the vehicle more quickly, but you may not necessarily need that. So I think it's all about like right sizing the infrastructure, because also the kind of higher the output chargers, the more expensive they are. So it's kind of like installing, like, it's like over installing something you may not necessarily need. So I think what's really important, and not to plug like fleet advisory services, but if you don't have the expertise on understanding the types of chargers that you may need, I would say definitely leverage outside resources like the Mass CEC program or our program. Because what we do is, one, look for relevant EV vehicles that your fleet could adopt, but we're also looking at the annual mileage driven and your mileage patterns. So then put forth a recommendation of, say, okay, here's the vehicle that you should consider procuring, but also here are the types of chargers based on your requirements. So it gives you the idea of not necessarily needing to buy the biggest charger just because it's the biggest charger, but the right charger because it fits your needs and it's fit for purpose, if that makes sense.
Totally. Thank you. And let's transition to the off-peak hours programs. You want to provide a little bit of more context at a high level and go from there?
Yeah, of course. So our fleet off-peak program, so generally, like, the idea behind this is to incentivize customers to charge during off-peak hours. So there's certain times of the day where the grid has more demand or less demand, and the less demand times are what we call off-peak. It's like kind of when there's available capacity or plenty of available capacity. And so the impetus is, if at night, which is generally true, the grid has plenty of capacity, let's encourage EV drivers to charge during those times. It's when the grid is less stressed. And so if by program design, should you charge your vehicle between 9 p.m. and 1 p.m., we'll then give you a credit. Because, like, if you think about, it's the middle of July, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a lot of air conditioners are going to be cranking. We're going to see a lot of demand on the grid, where if we can get EV owners to say, like, you know what, rather than charge right now, I'm going to charge at night. So one, it helps the grid, but then you as the program participant, you get compensated for that.
Got it. And how do whether it's private institutions or public institutions, how do they sign up for this program? Is the program is this the one that is eligible or available now, or is it more in June or July?
It's coming soon. So yeah, this program, we're in process of implementing it, so we're getting it up and running as we speak. But yeah, we're targeting like a late summer launch. So it's soon to launch, but yeah, you can be a private entity, you can be a public entity. It's entity agnostic on who can participate. The one kind of eligibility requirement are that the chargers themselves are networked. So we have a way of getting the charger data, because with a network charger, we can then validate, okay, Daniel, you actually charged between the hours that the program requires you to. So that's the one thing. You can't use quote unquote like a dumb charger, but we need a way to validate the data to ensure that you charge during those periods where a credit may be due.
Got it. And Hugh, for clarification's purposes, especially for the folks that might not be educated with the network, like what do you mean by network?
Network. Oh yeah, that's a really great question. So does the charger have a means and a way to capture your charging data, but then send it? So sometimes chargers are networked via like a Wi-Fi connection or an internet connection, or sometimes they may have like a SIM card. It's like got a backhaul where it's sending the data over a cell phone carrier, but it's transmitting the data to a database that then can be shared with a third party like your utility.
Got it. What would you say is the especially for this program, what would be the upside and the downside?
For off-peak, I think the upside is you get credits off your bill when you're charging during off-peak hours. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a downside. It just depends on like the entity and their charging patterns. Because if you have a fleet and a depot and the employees drive during the day and then the trucks park and charge overnight, I would say like that's the perfect use case, or like school buses, for example. But if you are an entity where maybe you have like a second shift where the fleet's traveling at night doing deliveries, then and you can only charge, let's say, during the day, then that may kind of not allow you to participate. So I would say, depending on your usage patterns and your truck routes and your charging patterns, that may dictate like how much or how little you can actually leverage the program. So I would say it's kind of dependent on the types of fleets and whether or not they can leverage it or not.
Got it. Thank you. And I know we talked on the make ready programs, on the off peak hours program.
Yeah.
And you want to talk a little bit about the demand charge utility programs?
Yeah. So the demand charge program, and I think I don't have the graphic, and I think the graphic can help, but there are a couple different buckets. So going back to explaining how like the demand charge works, like this can definitely be a significant adder to your bill. So like demand charge, if you have several high output chargers, can definitely make an impact on your bill. And so the impetus behind this program is how can we help customers when they install their chargers and the chargers are online, how can we help kind of mitigate that demand charge? Because they'll see a definite higher bill. And so the goal is minimizing or creating a way via this program that helps minimize this adder to the bill. And so it's looking at usage patterns, and then based on what kind of tier the participant falls in will dictate kind of how much of a demand charge discount we'll give. But yeah, I would say rule of thumb, you could expect to see savings of 20-ish% on your bill. So I think to me, it's like another one of those programs where it's like no cost to participate. And so if you fit within the eligibility criteria, I would 100% enroll, because there's like only upside if you purchase it.
Got it. Thank you for clarification. And is it available now, or is it coming up as well?
Yeah, this one, it launched this past year, and so I think it's available, and it's one of the things that we just try and do and advocate is make sure there's enough awareness about these programs. So yeah, I would say if you have chargers installed now, you do have to be on a commercial rate. So you have to be on what's called a G2 or a G3 rate. So it's essentially like you need to be a large user of electricity. But yeah, if you fit that requirement, then yeah, by all means, I definitely recommend applying to this program.
Got it. Thank you. And then to transition again to different topic, what would you say, based on your experience, are the most challenges that large operators are facing when it comes into electrification or the infrastructure behind it?
That's a really good question. And I think what I hear the most are costs. Because I think I guess 2 points. One, there are a lot of rebates out there, which is great. But even after the rebates, if you compare a ICE vehicle or an internal combustion vehicle to an EV, almost always the EV is going to be more expensive. So I think as a fleet operator, if you're going through this transition, your immediate upfront costs of procuring the vehicle are going to be expensive. With that being said, there's like what's known as total cost of ownership, and this is where we're trying to get people to think, kind of like not just at today, but the long-term savings that you see. So you'll see a higher upfront cost with an EV purchase, but EVs have less maintenance, and the fuel costs or electricity costs compared to gas costs are lower. So over the life of the duration of the vehicle, you're generally going to see savings. So I think like kind of balancing, yes, you're going to pay more up front, but longer term, you're going to see savings. So kind of seeing like both sides of the coin, I think is a big one. Another challenge that we do see, I think it's, and I like to kind of pick this apart a little bit, are like, there are tons of EV options out there, but there's not necessarily an EV option for every use case. So I think, take it for example, for a national grid, like we're undergoing electrification as a company right now as well. And our goal is to fully electrify our light duty fleet by 2030. What the more challenge is, like, as we start looking at our medium and heavy duty use cases, there, for our operators of the more heavy duty trucks, we just haven't found the right vehicles today that they could use that has an EV equivalent. But I think the story here is, look at that low hanging fruit when you're transitioning, you're and going down that electrification journey. Start what you could swap out today, and then longer term, we know as an industry there'll be definitely like innovations, and we'll see more options come down the horizon for sure.
Yeah, that is very well said, and that's very much what we see in today's market, especially with our clients, and with Fortune 1000 companies. When we come up with proposals for electrical vehicles, mainly the pushback is on the actual equipment, the infrastructure. Most companies could develop it and create it with time, but the cost of the actual vehicles is where I see the biggest hesitation, because sometimes it could be 3 to 5 times higher than the regular cost of the vehicle.
Yeah, and I think another challenge too is like, it's a different purchase and procurement. And so if you're traditionally used to buying just a vehicle, like when you buy an EV, you just don't buy the EV. You actually have to buy the charging infrastructure too. So there's like a different calculus as well. You have to plan your site and your facilities. You have to really understand how your operation's going to change. So they're like definitely more decision points with it. So I think a challenge is like if you don't have in-house expertise on guiding your organization through the process, you could see people kind of like stepping back and was like, I don't want to tackle this. But I think the plus side is there are a ton of experts out there to help organizations through this change. So I think that the looking kind of in the positive light, there's so many resources out there to help people through this process. So I don't want that to be forgotten.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioned that because that is an excellent point. Are you guys working with industry expert in the EV sector to educate folks, whether it's bus companies or charging companies or public entities, with experts in this transition to educate and eventually just help them mitigate any potential risk?
Yeah, I would say 100%. And that's where, for our fleet advisory services program, we actually our vendor partner is a company called ICF. And so they are just EV experts. And so I think that's the type of expertise. So if you're a fleet advisory services participant, I think this is like the perfect program for organizations that may be under-resourced or don't have the in-house expertise, where they can come to us and get that expert guidance. So I think that's where if you're trying to figure out like, hey, I don't even know where to start, is figure out, are there programs that we can leverage? So if you're a National Grid customer, you can leverage our fleet advisory services program. If you're a private entity, you can look at the Mass CEC program. But yeah, I think we're partnering with these organizations so that we can then have an output and a product that once we give to a customer, they have the data, but then two, the confidence to make the right decision and or present it to other internal stakeholders. So I think it's one, getting the data, but then two, having a means to share it amongst teams so then you can collectively build that strategy as you proceed.
Got it. And the Mass CEC stands for what, if I may ask?
Oh, and I apologize. There are lots of acronyms. Mass Clean Energy Center. Yeah, it's one of those things where I always tell myself I won't do that, but I'm doing it right now. Yeah. So the Mass Clean Energy Center is a great resource as well.
We get used to it. I totally understand. And again, switching a little bit of the subjects, based on your experience and what you've seen so far, how long do you think it would take for us to be fully electric and fully transition to the electrification journey in Massachusetts?
It's a really great question. So it's like what we're striving, I would say like what we're striving towards as a state. So the goal is to have over 900,000 EVs. So let's step back. Right now, I think the last time I checked, it's like 60,000 EVs are registered in Massachusetts today. By 2035, we're hoping to get 1.1 million vehicles on the road. And then the next tranche, it's like the end goal is roughly like 5 million. So yeah, I think the goal is to move aggressively and as fast as possible. And so I think that's where the state is like balancing what are the barriers to make adoption faster. And so that's where I think you see these state programs, these utility programs, because I think without these programs, it'll definitely move slower. So I wish I had the crystal ball to tell you when I think it'll be. But I'm encouraged that with the policies we have in place, with the utility programs and the state programs, I think we're going to see Massachusetts definitely be one of the fast movers when compared to the rest of the country. So I think we're in a great state to be in for sure.
And I appreciate you sharing that experience, because we have here folks in autonomous vehicles, flying vehicles, all these different industry experts, and no one really has the crystal ball. So,
right,
yeah, from my personal experience or perspective, I probably foresee it like a really good shift in the next 5 years. But it's gonna easily gonna take us at least 10 years, and especially one of the main weaknesses or challenges that I foresee is just the folks that are servicing these electrical vehicles and infrastructure. I think they still need to catch up with the wave of electrification, and
Right.
I don't think we have enough workforce to produce and train that workforce to maintain and service those equipments and that infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the workforce piece, because I was looking into like how many people are employed in Massachusetts in alternative transportation. So like there's a clean energy jobs report that reviews kind of holistically all jobs in kind of like the clean tech space in Mass. And in alternative transportation, it only represents roughly 4% of all jobs in the state. But the cool thing is, going from 2022 to 2023, there was a jump of 39%. So it's definitely the fastest growing market for people being employed in the alternative transportation space, but it only represents 4% of all quote unquote like green jobs. So I do agree. Like, I think we're going to see it kind of move, like as people adopt, you're going to see the need for these other ancillary industries needing to keep up. The more vehicles on the road, the more vehicles that'll need to be serviced. So I think it'll kind of go hand in hand based on the market as well.
Awesome. Well, Hugh, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. For all the listeners that would like to be part of the National Grid, actually, before we wrap up, are all these programs available in Massachusetts and all the regions that National Grid covers, and what are the other states that?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. So National Grid has a footprint in Massachusetts, so that's my focus. We also have a team in New York. So we have very similar programs in New York. I wouldn't say they're identical, but very similar. But then also we have a big presence in the UK. But what I've been talking to is specific through the lens of Massachusetts. So thank you for asking that. That's a good point.
And does this programs apply to New York as well, or New York has different programs?
So the New York programs are very similar, but they're not identical. So yeah, the New York, they have like slightly different eligibility requirements and slightly different rebate amounts. But the goal of the programs is to like drive down those costs, make it more palatable to like install the infrastructure. So yeah, definitely check out our websites, because we have both Massachusetts facing and New York facing websites that really go into the details. And then I would say, like, my role is one to help customers understand the programs, but help them through the process. So if anyone any listeners have any questions, I would say definitely reach out. I'm always happy to have a phone call or exchange an email on anything you have questions on.
Awesome. So how can all the listeners, for the listeners that might be interested in moving forward, how can they reach out to you or to your organization? What would be the best way to stay informed about you guys and your programs?
Yeah, I would say send me an email. So it's just hugh.reece@nationalgrid.com, and send me an email and I'll get in touch with you very quickly after you send me a note. So yeah, I think all about this is knowledge sharing and partnerships and collaboration. And I think it all starts with the conversation, and from there we can figure out like what makes sense. Because I think there are folks at varying levels throughout this journey, and at the end of the day, we're here to help. I don't think people necessarily think of transportation and utilities going hand in hand, but now, like, because we're the supplier of the distribution equipment, the power lines, the transformers, it's like it's someone you want to be talking to. So I advocate definitely involve us in any conversations, because we're here to help.
Perfect. Again, you very insightful. Thank you for being generous with your time and for sharing all your information in regards to this very interesting topic that is among a lot of the operators, not only in Massachusetts but in New York and across the country. And I look forward to hearing more in future episodes about you guys and how you guys are continue to make impact in our communities. And for all the listeners, please stay tuned for our next episode and have a great night. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Ground Transportation. We appreciate you coming along for the ride. If you found value in this episode and want to hear more, please make sure to subscribe to the show.